She went to the park because her head felt too full. No music, no phone calls, just air and movement. The old oak tree stood where it always had, wide and patient, its shadow stretching over a worn wooden bench. She sat down with a coffee she barely tasted, watching people pass without really seeing them. A few minutes later, someone asked if the bench was taken. He didn't look in a hurry. No headphones, no phone in hand. Just a book tucked under his arm and an uncertain smile, like he didn't want to interrupt but also didn't want to miss the chance. She shook her head and moved her bag aside. They sat in silence at first. Not awkward, just parallel. Birds, distant traffic, footsteps on gravel. She noticed he kept rereading the same page. He noticed she kept checking the lid of her coffee like it might tell her something important. Eventually, he commented on the tree. Said he'd read somewhere it was older than most of the buildings around it. She smiled and said that explained why it felt calmer there. Conversation slipped in gently after that, about favorite places in the city, about how parks make time slow down, about how easy it is to feel lonely even when surrounded by people. He told her he came there when decisions felt heavy. She admitted she came when she didn't want advice, just space. They laughed quietly at how similar that sounded. When he finally stood to leave, he hesitated. Asked if she came there often. She said sometimes. He said maybe he'd see her again. Not as a question. More like hope spoken carefully. A week later, she returned at the same time. He was already there, sitting on the bench with the book open, looking up as if he'd been waiting without admitting it. Some meetings don't need introductions or plans. They just need a shared moment of stillness. And a bench that's empty at the right time. As summer slowly leaned toward autumn, the park changed, and so did they. Leaves began to gather at the edges of the paths, and the air carried a sharper honesty. Their meetings became less about coincidence and more about intention. They didn't always sit on the bench anymore, but they always passed by it, like a quiet acknowledgement of where everything had started. They learned each other in pieces. Not through grand declarations, but through everyday truths. He learned she went silent when overwhelmed, not distant. She learned he needed time to process before responding, not because he didn't care, but because he cared deeply. These details mattered more than anything dramatic ever could. One afternoon, she arrived late, frustrated with herself and the day. He noticed immediately. Instead of asking what was wrong, he handed her a warm cup of tea he'd brought along and said nothing. They sat together, watching the park move around them. That was when she realized something had shifted. She didn't feel the need to explain herself to be understood. Eventually, the park stopped being the center of their connection and became its foundation. They built on it, shared dinners, quiet mornings, arguments that ended with listening instead of winning. They discovered that choosing each other wasn't about intensity, but about consistency. About showing up when things were calm, not just when they were new. One evening, walking past the oak tree again, she stopped and looked up at its branches. She said softly that some things last because they grow slowly. He squeezed her hand, agreeing without words. They didn't know where the story would lead. They didn't need to. What they had wasn't built on urgency or fantasy, but on something sturdier, shared stillness, honest presence, and the understanding that love doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it sits down beside you on a bench. Waits patiently. And grows strong enough to walk with you wherever you're ready to go next.